everyone. No? Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our latest virtual student event in partnership with BPP University Law School. I'm Annabelle Oliver, an events coordinator here at Legal Cheek, and I'm thrilled to introduce this afternoon's session, which is the latest in a series of virtual events we're running in partnership with BPP, which explore everything to do with the SQE. In previous sessions, we've spoken about a variety of SQE related topics, and you can find recordings of these sessions on our website. In addition to this, we've recently curated a list of the most frequently asked questions from students who attend these events, with answers written by BPP's SQE experts. This can be found on our new SQE FAQs page. My colleague will post a link to this page in the chat in just a moment. In today's session, we'll be talking through everything you need to know about the SQE, and the session will be chaired by Julie Harris, SQE1 Award Leader at BPP, as well as Johnny Hurst, BPP's Head of Outreach. We are also joined by Ife, Anastasia, and Michaela, who are all current or previous BPP SQE students, and they'll provide you with a little bit more information about themselves during the discussion. Just before I hand over to Julie and Johnny, I'd just like to do a quick bit of housekeeping. During the panel discussion, you can put any questions you may have in the chat tab. This is located on the right-hand side of your screen. You may also notice a tab that says polls. The question on the poll today is, where are you on your law journey? If you could just fill in the poll now, that would be great, because this just gives our speaker a better understanding of who's in our audience today. The discussion will take place from 4 p.m. until just after 5 p.m. and will be followed by an hour of virtual networking with the BPP University Law School team. Don't worry if we don't get a chance to answer your question during the panel discussion, as there'll be ample opportunity to do so during the networking. Also, please make sure you've got your chat set to stage, not event, so that we can see your questions as they come through. And finally, at 5 p.m, I will pop back onto the stage and direct everyone back over to the networking session for the second half of this event. So on that note, I'm going to hand over to Julie and Johnny for this afternoon's session.
Thank you so much. Oh, sorry, can you hear me there? I've got a slight issue with the delay on my screen. Can you hear me okay, Julie?
I can hear you, Johnny, yeah.
Great stuff. Now, I think my computer's just told me that I'm up to capacity with my storage, and therefore I need to release some storage. So I'm just going to literally get rid of that. That will improve, I think, everybody's experience of the session before we get going. So literally, I'm just going to click everything that can expand my storage. There we go. That should be better. Right, well, welcome everybody. I'm Johnny Hurst, the Head of Outreach at BPP University Law School, and I'm joined by Julie here, who is one of my colleagues. Julie, what's your role at BPP?
Hello, I am one of the SQE1 award leaders at BPP, so dealing with everything to do with SQE1 here.
And like me, you're a former practitioner. What was your property subject? Your subject? Oh, I've just given you the answer.
You've given it away. Yes, I was a commercial property / real estate solicitor before I came to BPP.
As I was as well. Just a caveat there. BPP employs people who not just practiced property law. Right, we're joined also today by 3 of our fabulous students, and so without further ado, let's get them to introduce themselves. We'll do with it in alphabetical order. Anastasia, tell us a little bit about your SQE journey, where you are, and training contracts and all that sort of thing.
Thank you. I hope you all had a good start to your week. Anastasia, I'm currently in my second CE at Norton Rose Fulbright. I'm in commercial disputes and investigations with a focus on cyber. I've did my SQE preparatory course as part of the City Consortium program last year. So yeah, very excited to be on this panel. Very honored. So thank you very much.
Fabulous. And Ife, tell us about your law journey.
Hi, thank you. My name is Ife. I currently work at the BPP Social Impact team as a trainee solicitor. I just completed my SQE2 exams in April, and I did my SQE1 in January. I did the LLM SQE course at BPP, and obviously I'm done with the SQE preparatory course. Now I'm going to be starting my LLM in August. Thank you.
Fabulous. So you're doing, so you're working as the first sort of 6 months of your qualifying work experience for our social impact team, aren't you? One of
Yes,
5
I am.
of our graduates who are given that opportunity, which is fabulous, and it's paid as well. Don't worry, I won't share how much you're being paid. And finally, without further ado, Michaela, tell us where you are in your journey.
Hi, I'm currently completing the master's element of the LLM SQE 1 and 2 practice at BPP. I successfully sat SQE 1 in January and just completed SQE 2 in May, so fingers crossed. I will be joining Stevenson Harwood's London office as a trainee solicitor in September.
Fabulous. So that's our fantastic panel. Let's now crack on. Just to say, folks, we will be answering questions all the way through. We will also be, as we mentioned earlier, having a networking session at the end. I would hold back on your questions in the chat for the time being, because the chances are we're going to answer many of your questions at some stage during the session. And before we go, just for the panel's benefit, we've got a survey that we've been running, and for the students who have completed it, we've got around about 30% are in their first year, about just under 30% in their final year of an LLB, about 20% who are an LLB or PGDL graduate, and the rest are either non-law graduates or from a non-law background or possibly working. So yeah, we've got a spread of people, but that gives you an idea of the composition of the audience. Now, we've run many of these sessions before, folks, and we do know that given the range of people that we can see in the room, there'll be a range of knowledge about the different types of SQE courses generally in the room. Some people will be coming to the SQE for the first time today. It's their first event where they're really starting to engage with it. Other people are really well researched. So what we will do is we'll build up knowledge and understanding of the pathway. The session is build everything you need to know. Just as a warning here, clearly we can't do everything you need to know in the space of an hour or two, but we would say it's everything essential that you need to know, particularly if you're coming to this from a decision-making point of view, to start to make your decisions as to which direction you go on down the SQE route. So let us just show you as an overview very quickly what we're going to cover. We're going to look at what the SQE is, the different types of courses that are available. We'll talk about pass rates and funding, affordability, and general questions as well during the course of the session. As I said, hold back on the questions just for 10, 15, 20 minutes whilst we go through the slides, and you'll see a lot of the questions that have been raised in advance by students will be covered in the session. So if you have raised a question, chances are we'll be answering it during the session. If I could go to Julie first of all, just for those who aren't familiar with the whole SQE pathway, this slide sort of summarises the different stages that people go through, and we've heard a little bit from the rest of our panel, but just in a nutshell, what does the SQE pathway look like for most people?
Yes, so on the slide are the Solicitors Regulation Authority, the SRA's requirements for you to qualify as a solicitor. So in those circles, you can see that you need to have a degree or equivalent. You need to have passed the SQE 1 part. So SQE is divided into parts 1 and parts 2. Candidates need to pass both SQE 1 and SQE 2, and they have to have passed SQE 1, as you can see there, before registering for SQE 2. You also need to have done 2 years of qualifying work experience, and finally, you need to pass the character and suitability test, which is something that has always been there. So yeah, and those there are plus symbols there because all of those things they don't come in a sequential order other than SQE 1 coming before SQE 2, but you can do them in any order so long as you've got all of them by the time you come to qualify.
Absolutely, and I think so. A lot of people will go straight into paralegal roles after they do their law degrees, before they look at an SQE textbook or program or course. It really doesn't matter what order you do the exams and your QWE. You can mix and match them, do them at the same time, run them in parallel. It's really up to you. Great stuff. So what is the SQE? I think what we'll first of all do is to just show you this slide. And I suppose if I could go to IFE first of all, first part of SQE 1, which is the first set of exams, the first half of the subjects that are covered are the subjects covered in white here. What are these in a nutshell, from a student's perspective?
So included contract law, tort law. The legal systems in England and Wales is essentially public law, which you do during your undergraduate degree. And these three things are underlying legal topics that you do during your undergraduate degree. However, there are also some things that you study during the SQE prep course that are included in the first part of the SQE1 examination. But for contract law, tort law, and legal system of England and Wales, those are underlying legal knowledge.
Great stuff. So these fantastic. These are all the subjects that people will have studied when they finished their law degrees or their conversion courses, you've said. And then if we could come on to Anastasia, tell us about the rest of these subjects here, the ones in black here.
Sorry, sorry about the light there. Yes, the other subjects, business law and practice, dispute resolution, property practice, wills and administration of estates, criminal practice, and solicitor's accounts. These are subjects that BPP specifically teaches you as part of your preparation course through a series of tutorials that happen on a weekly basis.
Great stuff. And if I could bring Michaela in here, the assessment itself for SQE1, it's quite a rigorous exam. Do you just want to explain the journey you've been on and gone through, and of course passed an SQE1 as well?
So the format of the assessment is very different to what we did in law school. SQE1 happens over the course of 2 days. So FLK1, which is the first paper, is comprised of the subjects that we just mentioned in the form of 180 multiple choice questions, and FLK2, which is the second paper, happens on a different day. And again, it's 180 multiple choice questions.
Fantastic. So you've got a choice of 5 options on each for each answer. In terms of your just overall experience of the assessment, how did you find it?
I found it very different and very interesting, considering the fact that I had never had to directly write MCQ exams like this. So firstly, I found it interesting because of the structure of the exam. And also, like Michaela said, it's 180 questions that you're answering under 90 minutes in one day. So it was quite stressful to have it split into 1 hour for 90 questions and another hour for another 90 questions. So it was quite interesting and very, very time consuming, very stressful, and it cost me a lot of anxiety.
Yeah, I'm sure. In fact, I think it's 2 hours 33 for the 90 questions in the morning and 2 hours 33 in the afternoon. I think the mocks might be slightly different, but I think that's right, isn't it? And then you do the same again a week later. So really quite a rigorous exam. I've worked out actually it's 1 minute 42 seconds on average you get to answer each question. Anastasia, any memories of how you tackled and passed, obviously, those assessments? Any tips you would give for people approaching what is quite an intense exam?
I mean, firstly, I'd say a lot of it is very mental. I think so much of it is about approaching the exam saying, I have done as much as I can. Whatever questions I do not know the answer to directly, I will have to trust myself that I will be able to narrow it down, look at each question, and just think about it very methodically. I think the ability to stay focused on the question that you're being asked, instead of thinking, oh, did I get that question right? Did I get the question 50 questions ago right? I think that was really important to make sure that you just stay on track and you stay within the time limits, and then ultimately you get it right and you pass.
Yeah, I think the ability to switch off from the last question, not worry about what you've written, but keep refocusing and resetting each time, I think is a really good bit of advice. Okay, so that's SQE1. And as Judy said a moment ago, if you pass SQE1, then you can register to sit SQE2, which looks a little like this. Julie, do you just want to give us an overview first, and then maybe we'll hear from Michaela in terms of, obviously you've sat the exam but not got the result yet. But Julie, tell us about how these assessments are assessed.
Yeah, so SQE2 is known as the skills assessment. But it's important to remember that there is a knowledge element to it as well. So you are bringing knowledge from SQE1 and combining that with various skills. So you can see across the top, we've got oral skills and written skills. So 6 skills that are being assessed, and they are assessed across a total of 16 exams. And you can see on the left-hand side that the different subjects that you encounter in SQE1 are tested across the different skills. So as it says, criminal litigation is assessed in advocacy and will be assessed in written skills as well. So there are our students will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's 5 half days of assessments that you get for SQE2. So it's quite a different beast from SQE1.
Yeah. So Michaela, you would have sat, SQE1, FLK1, the first exam in 1 week, and the second exam in the second week. But it's 5 half days worth for SQE2. So what's your experience of SQE2? How does that compare to SQE1?
I completely agree that it's a very different set of exams, and you definitely need to show a lot of resilience in order to show your knowledge in these particular circumstances. The one thing that I learned while I was going through it is, at first I was thinking that after each exam every day, I would be able to revise for the next day. But by day 3 of the written ones, I actually realized that this is not viable, and instead people should maybe have a break in order to perform much better on the next day.
Yeah, that's really good advice. And it is a bit of an endurance test, isn't it, Anastasia, for somebody who's got through it? Any tips for keeping your energy levels up?
Caffeine. But yeah, no, I mean, to be honest, I think in reality, I think it comes back to the mental thing. The way that you maintain energy levels is just not being constantly stressed and worried about what is going to be, in front of you, what has happened behind you already. I think, you can take breaks. I've taken, I think, 1 or 2 breaks per exam, which sounds like a lot, but in reality, it's actually quite good to just have a moment to step away and focus on other things around you just for maybe 30 seconds or some time like that. Give yourself a very defined time frame, and then come back. Those moments really help me just, again, to calm my nerves and bring my energy levels back, and then just continue.
Good stuff. We've got a few questions on the chat. I won't deal with many questions on the chat, but some of them are on the subjects we've just covered now. So one question from Nicholas is, can you be exempt from courses in the SQE if you've studied them extensively in a previous degree? What's the answer to that, Julie?
So if you've studied it, so generally the answer would be no. So in order to qualify, you need to have passed SQE1 and SQE2. There are some very specific rules for foreign qualified lawyers who might be able to get some exemptions. But if you're not already qualified in a foreign jurisdiction, so non-England and Wales jurisdiction, then you have to have passed SQE1 and SQE2 in order to qualify.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Sam Hovey's question is about somebody who's a foreign law graduate but not an English law graduate, who may have done an LLM in England and Wales in quite a niche subject. You would be treated as a non-law graduate for English law purposes, and a lot of the universities would require you, including BPP, to do a conversion course. A question from Aya Banua, Julie, is the exam negatively marked? What if you don't answer an MCQ correctly, or maybe leave it blank? Are you negatively marked, or are you negatively marked if you get one wrong?
You're not negatively marked. It's just you just don't get a mark. So I would always say answer every question, even if you're not sure.
Because it's so time pressured. How do you deal with tricky questions? When you did, I'm sure out of the 360 questions, there were a few you weren't sure about, at least. How do you deal with a tricky one in terms of coming back to it? Do do you leave it blank and then come back to it, or do you make a best guess now and then if you have time come back to it? What's the strategy?
So what I did was the questions that I saw that I knew the answer to directly, I focused on answering those ones first. And the ones that were quite tricky, I left them to come back to them. And in regard to the tricky questions, I firstly did a process of elimination to know that, okay, this option and this option is possibly definitely not the answer. So with the options I had, if I know that I didn't know the law, it was more of a situation of having to guess, having engaging in like a normal mind answer. What do I expect as a normal person who does not have knowledge of the law that this answer would be? And I went with those options. And it's possible that even those options I went with were the right ones. So I would advise anybody not to just leave the answers blank and just try and put in an option despite you not knowing the law.
Yeah, Anastasia, how does that compare with your experience?
Yeah, no, I think I completely agree.
Okay, fine. That's fine if you agree. Right. Another question that's come up was from Johan. As an LPC graduate, you're saying that SQE2 looks the same as LPC in terms of skills. Why do we need to sit SQE2 if we qualify after doing the LPC? Oh, Julie, do you want to explain the position in terms of the LPC? Specifically, if you are an LPC graduate, what are your options?
Yeah, so if you have studied the LPC and passed the LPC assessments, then it is firms have up until, well, I mean, firms are still employing LPC graduates. And the LPC is currently still, it is recognised, of course, still as a qualification route by the SRA, but and not all LPC graduates are sort of having to sit SQE2. It's not saying that, but firms might require. They might prefer to have SQE graduates, given that is now the sort of common route for qualifying solicitors to take. So it may be that some LPC graduates choose to do SQE2. They would be exempt from SQE1, but they may now choose to do SQE2 to give them that additional appeal, I suppose, if you like, to show that they've done both of those qualifications.
Yeah, and of course, if you're an if you are an LPC graduate and you can't secure a traditional LPC training contract, the only way you can qualify is to do SQE2 and then 2 years worth of qualifying work experience. So those are the rules. So if you can get a traditional LPC training contract, great, you don't have to deal with SQE at all. But if you do not manage to secure an LPC training contract, you will, because that's the way the rules are, need to do SQE2 plus qualifying work experience. I can see that we've got a few more questions there, we'll come back to a little bit later on. Just hold fire on the questions because we've got quite a lot to get through, including the advanced questions from the students, and some of the stuff I can see in the chat we have got ready, or already very similar questions up and running. So let's move on and talk about what the SQE is in terms of some of the questions. So let's deal with all three of our students now. I think you're all law graduates. How does the SQE compare to a law degree content? So Michaela, do you want to kick us off with that?
I'm very happy to take this one because I actually went to the University of Southampton, so thank you, Johnny. I would say the SQE does compare to a law degree in terms of you're introduced to a large volume of content that you need to understand quite well. However, the main difference would be the format of the examination. Obviously, the single best answer format is quite distinct to a law degree. So the main difference is not that much in the content, whereas in the assessment type, I would say.
Great stuff. And of course, we've got this duplication, which is what it is on this black letter law content, which is very similar in terms of content in that regard, but then there's all the practice subjects, of course, that are different. In terms of your experience, Anastasia, can you add anything at all?
Yeah, sure. I think the closest comparison I can also give with the SQE2 as well, which I found to be quite interesting, is that at least when I was studying my law degree, a lot of the discussion surrounded theoretical issues. So what are the tensions in the law? What are the different reasonings that different judges have come to? When you're doing the SQE2, the focus is very strictly on what does the client need? What is the most practical way of getting to that point? And almost the emphasis flips onto what is the outcome rather than what is the reasoning in terms of getting there, which is still important, but you want to make it as user-friendly as possible in terms of structure instead of just essay style. And in terms of the content, it's all about practical implications for the client and potential risks and benefits of certain approaches. So that would be my take.
I would say it's all about client-focused advice, understanding how to do certain transactions, how to get a case through all the stages of a litigation process, and so on. Great stuff. And actually, before we go further, in terms of SQE, we have got a question about SQE2. If I could just stick with Anastasia, because you've obviously been through that. What and obviously, well, I suppose Michaela and FA as well. Maybe we'll start with FA. We haven't heard from you for a while. How does SQE2 exams compare to anything you might have studied before? Or could you give us this sort of the typical setup, say, in a day for written exams, and then we'll go for the oral exams, maybe to Michaela?
So the written exams were over 3 days, and on each day you do legal research, legal writing, CMA and legal research, legal writing, CMA, and legal drafting. And obviously, in each day you do 2 practice areas. However, on the last day we did only business law and practice. So it's split into different times for the different skills. So for legal drafting it was about 45 minutes. For legal writing it was 30 minutes. For CMA it was an hour. CMA is case and matter analysis, and then for the last one, legal research, it was an hour as well. So they're split like that, and in between 2 of the exams, you have like a 15 minutes break in between. So on the days, obviously, you start with one skill, do the second skill, then you have the 15 minutes break, then you do 2 more skills. And the first day, I think it was dispute resolution and criminal law and practice. On the second day, it was wills and property law. Then on the last day, business is tested on all of the skills, so on the legal research, legal writing, legal drafting, and CMA.
And so although you've signed a non-disclosure agreement, maybe you could just give an idea of the type of assessment, because they're not multiple choice of questions. These are very practical, aren't they?
Yes.
So say or for the written skills for say legal drafting, what sort of thing might you expect to receive?
Okay.
Or what's the assessment look like, without necessarily giving away what the assessment was?
Okay, so for legal drafting, for example, in practice area of dispute resolution, you might have to draft something like a witness statement for a client, or like a claim form, which is the form that you fill when you're helping a client to take their matter to court, or you could draft a particulars of claim, which is the form that's attached to the claim form. Then for criminal law, you could also be drafting something like a witness statement for legal drafting. Then for legal research, they ideally give you a number of sources that you have to look through and some questions from a client, and you have to look through the sources and come up with a client-focused answer for that particular question that the client has brought to you. Then for case and matter analysis, it's similarly the same. The client gives you some questions and you have to then think based on what you've read and based on what you've understood from before the exam, you have to then give the client a client-focused advice based on the questions they've given you. And legal writing is quite similar to case and matter analysis, but it's just less time and it's shorter.
And if you're writing something like a letter to a client or something like that,
yes.
Yeah.
So it's not really like how you write essays in university. It's more like writing a client-focused advice letter. So it's quite different from essays at university.
As you would do in practice. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of idea of what the written assessments look like. Michaela, what about the oral assessments? I mean, principally there's advocacy and there's client interviewing. So again, don't breach your non-disclosure agreement, but give us a bit of an idea of a flavour of what the set piece looks like over 45 minutes, an hour, however long it is.
Advocacy begins with having 45 minutes to go through some documents and prepare your argument, which you then need to present in front of the assessor, who will play the role of the judge, meaning that you would have 15 minutes to present. You might get asked some questions by the judge, which might be a bit scary on the spot. For interviewing, you have 10 minutes to go through some documents and prepare some questions for a meeting with a client, meaning that the assessor would be in the role of a client. You will go into the meeting, and for 25 minutes, you would be able to ask them different questions. Afterwards, you go away and you have 25 minutes to produce an attendance note of what happened during that meeting. And again, during the first day, this would be in the context of disputes and criminal litigation. And on the second day, that would be wills and property practice.
Great stuff. So Anastasia, we've heard quite a detailed summary, a really helpful summary of what these exams look like. They sound quite intense in terms of these small pieces. Is it quite difficult to manage the time, or do you have enough time?
I think the more practice you do, the better accustomed you are to the time limits, because I think initially, when you do the mocks at BPP, I found it initially quite stressful to try and get a good piece of initial analysis or initial kind of thoughts done for the interview stage, particularly for the client interview element of it. I think there is a fair bit of thinking on your feet when you are in the client interview, because they will be coming up with things that you don't necessarily know or had awareness before you started the interview. So I think, the more you practice, the more you get comfortable with being given new information. I think the better and easier it is to handle the time limits, I think.
Good stuff. Thank you. Thank you. So if I go to Julie, in terms of the SQE content, how similar is that to the PGDL? That's from a student from the University of Bristol.
Yes, I think it does depend on where you might choose to do a postgraduate diploma in law. BPP's law conversion course, ours is called, is very closely aligned to the SQE. So you'll have those underlying law subjects that we've seen on a previous slide in white, and they are the subjects that are taught on our law conversion course. And one piece of advice that I give to lots of students and prospective students at the moment is to make friends with the SQE assessment specification, because that sets out what you need to know, what you could be tested on within each underlying law and practice subject. So I teach a lot on the conversion course, and for land law, for example, which is one of my subjects, that's very closely aligned to what you need to know for SQE. So it really depends. Yeah. I think if you're looking at conversion courses, that is a really good question to ask. How closely aligned is it? Because obviously the closer it is aligned, the more focused you can be on ensuring that you're really ready to take SQE as a non-law student.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And there are some conversion courses that people are passing them off as conversion courses that are literally you can do a crammer course in a couple of weeks. Personally, I wouldn't entertain them at all. If you think you can get to the level of a 3-year graduate, or somebody's done a full best part of a year PGDL in 2 weeks of a crammer course, you need your head seeing to. There are crammer courses out there, but I would treat them very, very carefully and ask yourself, are you really going to be on a level playing field with everyone else? And the answer is simply you will not. So don't take the cheapest, quickest version, because you'll end up paying for it in the SQE when you realize you haven't really got that solid platform of knowledge. One other question. How advantageous would it be for students going over the SQE content whilst doing their law degree? I suppose it's all about keeping everything warm, isn't it? What would you say, Julie?
Yeah, definitely. And particularly if thinking about the order in which you might study subjects on a law degree. So you might be doing contract and tort. They tend to be the ones that you study in the first year. And so you've got to keep those a little bit warm over the course of, potentially quite a few years before you might come to do SQE. So again, I would say it's worth making friends with the SQE assessment specification. I can put a link in the chat in a moment, and just seeing. Just doing a little bit and often just sort of checking in, or what's on the contract syllabus for SQE, what have I done in contract law, and just keeping it ticking over to put yourself in the best possible position.
Great stuff. Great stuff. Lots of great questions in the chat, and what I would suggest, guys, is there are so many questions in the chat. We're simply not going to get through them in the first hour. But please make sure you've got them either copied and pasted onto your clipboard for the networking session, or go on camera, better still, in the networking session and ask it then. But we'll get through as many of them as we can. But we've got a number of the pre-asked questions coming up now, so some more coming up. So how does SQE prep courses address the concerns about niche areas of practice? How do they cater for sort of non-traditional candidates who want to sort of practice in specialist areas? Julie, if you want to start off with that, and then we'll compare that to the experience of our candidates here who've been through the master's programme at BPP.
Yeah, sure. So again, if we think back to that slide where we had the different areas of law that are assessed in SQE, that I would say that they're not particularly niche, and that is because ultimately the SRA is trying to create a level playing field where everybody is studied the same subjects and everybody is assessed in the same subjects. So yes, to an extent, I would say the SQE is very much it's not niche. Having said that, though, in the old LPC system, there was much more of an imbalance, I would say, and so to give you an example of that, in SQE, there is as much time given to criminal law or to wills, which perhaps under the LPC regime, there was much more focus on litigation and business, and all of those. So all of those practice subjects, they're very much equal. In relation to studying more niche areas, so perhaps, I don't know, personal injury or family law or something like that, BPP offers it's the Essentials for Practice course, and that really is about going into some of those niche areas, if we want to call them that, in much more detail, and really being able to get into the detail of some of those areas of law that are not examined on SQE, which are really, they are really important for many students. They're really important for many law firms, and so that's the way that students can really get into the detail of some of those more niche areas.
Great. So just to be clear, when you're doing a master's, an SQE master's at BPP, you'll spend the first term on SQE1, the second term on SQE2, and that third term you'll be spending on what we call Essentials for Practice, which is the term where you focus on these niche areas of law. Ife, which stream did you choose to study for your specialist areas?
So I'm doing the commercial pathway, which includes commercial dispute resolution, commercial property, and commercial contract. But obviously, there's also the general one, which includes personal injury, employment law. So I feel like that one touches on the niche areas that they are referring to. But I'm doing the commercial pathway.
Great stuff. And Michaela, which one are you doing?
Mine were selected by my firm. So I'm currently doing international trade, private acquisitions, equity finance, and commercial contracts.
Okay, fine. And Anastasia, you're on the CCP course, which has a similar thing called the Plus program again, which has these additional modules that are they more corporate focused?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, so it's broken down into 4 mini seats. It would be private mergers and acquisitions, debt finance, commercial disputes and investigations, and then more sort of listed companies, public M&A type things.
Yeah. So just to go back to the question again, everybody. So the SQE, as Julie said, is quite a narrow syllabus, but the way you can get that exposure to specialist practice areas is at BPP certainly to do our SQE Masters and add on this third term where you choose a practice stream, either corporate, commercial, or general practice. And general practice, as Ife said, would include family law, employment law, personal injury, and medical negligence. Great stuff. Julie, how many times can you take the exam? Hopefully as few as possible. Hopefully we get through first time, but for those who don't,
Yeah,
what are the
absolutely.
rules?
So it's 3. You can have 3 sits within a 6-year period.
Yeah. So one, and I think the clock starts ticking from the first SQE exam.
First SQE exam, yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, more questions that were sent in advance coming up. How many hours of independent study is required? Well, let's talk about the study experience of our students here. So, Michaela, what was your study experience? How many hours were you in class? How many hours of private study were you spending each week?
So at BPP, we would get 4 workshops a week, which would typically be around 2 hours. On top of that, I would usually treat every single day as a working day. So I would start working at around 9 and finish, or aim to finish, at 5 or 6. However, SQE is intense. So sometimes, occasionally, I would need to work on a weekend or on an evening. What I also did is I used to dedicate specific weekends just for the underlying law subjects, which I found very helpful, which was closer to the BPP mock exams.
Great stuff. How does that compare with your experience, Anastasia?
Yeah, I mean, so the hours of workshops, it would be the same number. I think in terms of how I approached it, I think for hours, for me, if I'm just for me personally, I wanted to take a little bit more time. And I did work on the weekends. I did work in the evenings as well. I think my approach was to go over some things that I have done for a few years. So I wanted to make sure that it was consistently at the top of my mind. So every day I would essentially, I would combine and list all the topics that could come up on the specification. I think when I did it, it counted up to around 115, depending on how I split it up. Some topics are smaller, some topics are larger, and I calculated the number of days that I had until the exams that were working days, and essentially just divided roughly how many I needed to go through each day until the exams, accounting for, things going wrong, sometimes you're a bit more tired, you don't get through as many topics. But I tried to balance every day a selection of smaller and larger topics so that each day I kind of felt like I was making good progress and could assess, what areas were my strengths, what areas I just wanted to work a little bit more at. So that was my approach. But the thing that it allowed me to do, which I think is the most important thing and helped me a lot for the SQE1, is just getting a feel for the law, because a lot of the times you're not gonna know the precise answer straight away. You're not going to be 100% confident. And I think if you develop a gut instinct for the law through this kind of regular revision, I think it really helps you get those questions right, those marginal ones where you're not quite sure which answer is correct.
Cool. And finally, we normally say that you're roughly 8 to 10 hours in a classroom, certainly for SQE1, and about 25, 30 hours of independent study on top. How did that compare to what you actually did for SQE1?
Mine was quite similar to Anastasia and Michaela. During the week, I focused on the practice areas, obviously things we learned during the SQE. So after each workshop, I would go to the library and then go back in everything that we had learned in the class, do any consolidation tasks that we had to do, and engage in like other practice tests that we had that BPP had provided us. And during the weekends, I did more of like independent study, focusing on the things on the underlying things from uni. So before I started the course, I went back to gather all my notes that, based on the SQE specification for the underlying knowledge, I went back to gather all my notes that would be needed for the SQE exam. So from the get-go, from the start day of the SQE prep, I started revising all the underlying knowledge during the weekends. So because of that, I was able to split out time to be able to engage in every single underlying knowledge subject. But during the week, I was focusing more on the practice areas, engaging in the consolidation tasks and engaging in all the practice tests that BPP provided us.
Great. And we do provide full documents for you to read, to revise and relearn if you need to, all those black letter law areas. So you don't have to go searching for your university notes, but it's worthwhile dusting them down before you join us, before we give you access to our platforms, just to remind yourselves of some of the basics of those core black letter law areas. What are the resources from BPP that we provide, Julie, to help people practice for their assessments?
So if we're talking specifically about resources to practice, so they're different between SQE1 and SQE2. For SQE1, you get formative, so mock assessments. So there'll be shorter mock assessments for each of the practice subjects. You get a set of mock questions after workshop 5, so that covers weeks 1 to 5, and then you get another set of formative assessments after workshop 10, so that they allow you to just keep practicing your multiple choice questions. And as well, within workshops, I'm sure the students can speak more to this, but within workshops as well, there's multiple choice question practice where you go over certain questions with tutors. There are also then 200 question formatives that you can do that cover all of the potential subjects that you could come up in SQE1. And then there are also BPP assessments. So they are BPP assessments for BPP, your BPP award, whether that's a master's or a diploma. But they are also a really good way of getting ready for the centralized assessments as well, because they very much mirror the form of the SQE1 assessments. For SQE2, similarly, there's a formative assessment period where you would be doing practice tests in all of the skills that you would be examined in SQE2. And again, practices within workshops. So yes, in terms of, if we're talking pure kind of practice for the SQE exams, there are lots of different opportunities to practice.
Yeah, there's lots of good questions coming up, including how well do the mock questions reflect the actual exam questions? It's a really good question, because a lot of students say that the SRA's sample questions are very different to the ones that they get in the exam, and this is the problem. We as providers have never seen an actual SQE assessment question other than the ones provided on the SRA's website. So, well, I'll leave it to the students maybe to answer that in terms of the questions. So, Michaela, how was your experience of answering mock questions? Did they reflect the level of difficulty, the style of questions that you got asked?
I would say both the BPP mock and the summative assessment that I did a little over a month and a half before the real thing was very accurate comparing to SQE1 for both FLK1 and FLK2, yes.
Oh, that's good to hear. I'm going to move on because we've got lots more questions to answer in the slides. So, if you could do it in a one-liner for us, student panel, starting off with what's the most challenging part about SQE for you?
I would say the possibility of failure, considering the fact that I had gone through all my notes, read and prepared myself diligently. I just had it at the back of my mind that it was still a very high possibility that I could fail this exam and have to pay all over again. And that caused me so much pressure and anxiety that at sometimes I even started to forget some of the things I had read because I was focusing my mind on the possibility of failure. So I would say take that out of your mind and just focus on the positives. Yeah.
Well, you passed first time, didn't you?
Yes,
SQE1. So there we are. great example. And it's always the best students that I find that worry the most, which is sad, but often very true. How about your experience, Anastasia? What was the most challenging part for you?
Yeah, I mean, like the fear of failure is ever present. I mean, I think another issue that I think I faced that was a challenge for me is just the mental stamina that you've constantly had to maintain throughout the entire year. Because I started working after SQE1. I had my job interview internally at NRF in the pro bono team a day after my FLK2 exam, and then since then I was essentially at work for various reasons until midway through my SQE2 preparation. So when you have so many spinning wheels, you feel like you constantly have to be at your 100%, and you feel like you can't afford rest. But I think honestly, the times that you feel like you can't afford to rest is the time that you need it most.
Fabulous. Great answer. Michaela, what was your most challenging aspect so far?
I completely agree with everything that was said. What I can add is also the time management part. SQE course and SQE is a very different set of exams. Therefore, getting used to doing a lot of independent study is quite different to undergraduate. So maybe that was the most difficult part for me.
Yeah, and we're now rolling out, aren't we, Julie? Because we are very conscious of the pressure that students are under. A huge amount of additional support to support the mental health of students. There's this new mental health platform that we've got for students. I know it's all very, very new, but what's the reasoning behind that, do you think?
Yeah, so it's called SQE Wellbeing, and we are very conscious, as you said, of the pressure that students are under for lots of reasons. And so it's a great resource, and it pulls on both our students who've been through it, and it pulls on resources that are available from charities such as Lawco, which is a fantastic charity, and just sort of it takes students through the course of their SQE and just gives them some bite size. It's not intended to be onerous. It's just bite size tips, little videos, little bits of reading, resources that can just help you with whatever worries or challenges that you might be facing at that particular time.
Yeah, what I really like about it is it is aligned to the part of the course where they're on. So when you're at this week of the course, watch this video or watch these series of videos. So as you get towards the exams, it's all about dealing with the stress of the exams, and then as you go into the exams, and there's another one to support you with dealing with the actual process of going through the exams. I think it's really helpful just to hear from people who've been through that. I'm sure that would have helped our panel, but it's only new for students starting around about in the next few months. We've got quite a lot of questions here that I think some of these we will answer, I think, in the networking session. What I want to do is if I could just skip through to this slide here, just to talk about the range of prep courses that are available, because a lot of students aren't aware of the fact that there are so many courses out there, and you have to choose between so many. And I just wanted to give you just a little 1-minute guide as to the things to be taking into account when you're choosing your SQE course and your SQE course provider as well. And what you need to appreciate, there are courses where you can just buy materials to prepare to sit the exams, all the way through to doing courses at non-universities, just companies that set up and advertise their materials or courses, to fully fledged universities like BPP that will deliver university validated diplomas and master's courses. And of course, the further to the left of the chart there, the cheaper the course. But that comes at a different cost if you go for a cheaper course, as we'll show in a moment. First of all, the non-master's courses don't come with master's funding, whereas if you do a master's course, that one that includes that essentials for practice that we've heard about already on top of the SQE modules, you can cover a significant proportion of your course fees from master's funding from the student loans company. So that's a very good reason. Double win there, helps with the funding significantly, but also gives you that added content as well, and live teaching, which is very different to what you'll get on the left hand side of the grid with a lot of DIY courses or just materials that you read on an app. There are some that have very little or no teaching at all compared to the diplomas and master's courses that will either have online live teaching or face-to-face teaching, and with master's cases, extended topics, as we've heard. And not surprisingly, the courses at the left-hand side tend, generally speaking, to have lower pass rates, whereas the more comprehensive courses, not surprisingly, will have generally higher pass rates. So we'll be sharing a link to all of these slides for you later on. I think this is quite a helpful slide for anybody who's thinking about what type of prep course to do, really to think about what matters for you on this sort of grid here. Whereabouts do you want to be? In an ideal world, we'd normally recommend you go towards the right hand side because it could be more comprehensive. You'll get help with the funding if you are, as most students are, if they're domestic students, able to tap into the master's funding if you're not being sponsored. Okay, a brief word about career changes. I just want to cover on this one before I go back to the panel. We recommend that you do a full law conversion course for the reasons we've said earlier. Don't do a short crammer course. It will not put you in the same position, which is a point we mentioned earlier. And now we'll talk about the SQE pass rates, because the question came up in the chat about that. Julie, do you want to just take us through, because we've asked her, is it easier to pass if you've had practical work experience in a law firm? What do you think?
SQE2, perhaps. I think I mean, again, panel probably got some views on this. I think because SQE2 is examining your skills, then you may well find it easier to at least to get into the mindset of those skills and have had practice in them in a law firm context, for example. I think for SQE1, because it's examined by way of multiple choice question, and because it's testing breadth of knowledge across a lot of different subjects, personally, I wouldn't say necessarily that it's easier to pass that bit if you've had practical experience. But yeah, given that I've not taken SQE, that's just my opinion of kind of knowing about the system and what they're testing at each stage of it.
And I think it's fair to say on the right hand side of the question there, the success rates for those who self-study tend to be lower. But those who are doing part-time study alongside a job, because they're spreading their studies over a longer period, if they're very organised, there's not a discernible difference in the pass rates of students that we look at ours. I can't speak for other providers. What percentage of people resitting have ended up passing? That came from a student who didn't give their university. It's quite worrying in terms of, if you do fail an SQE exam, the pass rate at second, third attempt is quite low. I've seen it varies, but it tends to be for SQE1 in around the 30%. So if you fail once, you've probably only got a 1 in 3 chance of passing unless something radically changes. Still means that people are passing on a resit, but obviously it's more challenging for those who fail once to pass again. Julie, do you want to just take us through the SQE1 results from January 2024 and just explain our results and then compare that to the national average?
Yes. Okay. Yes. So this so the SQE1 is sat in January and July every year. So we collected results from our students. There's been a period, hasn't there, Johnny, of not really getting any information at all from the SRA, and we are now getting more information about pass rates from the SRA. But we survey our students and ask them for their results. So across all of our cohorts who sat in January 2024, we had 79% pass rate, and we collected those results, as it says there, from over 75% of our students who are first sitters, and that compares to a 59% national pass rate. So we're really proud of our students.
We're
really
20% above that national average, which is great, and very similar situation this time last year, where the pass rate we had for all of our cohorts, and this is critical when you compare it to other providers who don't survey all their cohorts, we'd literally say everyone who did the exam, give us your results. We will verify your transcripts, and we got the results from 85% of them, 73% passed, and that compared to a national pass rate, so almost 20% above the national pass rate then. And that's for the first sitters. I think someone in the chat cited a different pass rate for the January 24 exam. There's different pass rates for everyone who sat, which would include resitters, so it'll be slightly lower if you include resitters. But the headline pass rate that the SRA publishes is one that relates to first-time sitters, which is what you can see on the screen here. And then similarly, we're smashing the ball out of the park with our SQE2 results. So just giving confidence to our 3 students here that there's a very good chance that you will pass. Again, we're smashing it compared to the national average in terms of our pass rates. Okay, now, well, I know we've clocked around till 5 o'clock. I just wanted to cover the cost of the funding SQE assessments, and we'll take that into the networking session a little bit later on. But Julie, just take us through the assessment fees that need to be paid, if you could do.
Yep. I'm glad they're on the slide. I did also write them down. So there are separate fees that you have to pay for the SQE1 assessments and the SQE2 assessments. So that's from October 24, as it says on the slide, it will be 1,888 for SQE1 and then 2,902 for SQE2. So a total of 4,790, and that is just for the assessments. And if you sort of hinted at this earlier, but if you fail, then you have to pay those fees again in order to resit the assessments. And then if you do a course, so a diploma or a master's, for example, then you would have to pay for that diploma or master's on top of those centralised assessment fees. So we're well aware that there is a significant financial outlay.
That's why we offer scholarships against our
Yeah.
course fees, quite extensive ones. And I am running a campaign to try and establish a 7-figure or 8-figure sum that is a bursary sum for students to sit these assessments by the bursary funding those assessments. It's a question of watching this space, because I think it's an absolute scandal that students from socially mobile backgrounds are expected to find this in cash and also finance the course fees as well. If you do a master's, yeah, the significant proportion can be funded by the master's funding, but there will be a shortfall, and you've got to live off something as well. And it's not changing the composition of the profession if it's making it very challenging for people from financially difficult backgrounds to be able to afford to sit the assessments. So that was SQE costing and funding. I think we'll pause there. There was a few other things we were going to talk about, but we've clocked around to 5 o'clock. Thank you so much to our 3 fantastic students. So who I hope will you be able to join us in the networking session, folks? Great stuff. So any questions that come up in the chat, fantastic. We'll answer all those questions. I'm going to hand back to Annabelle, who's just going to give you some instructions now in terms of what happens next.
Thank you so much for that discussion, everyone. As mentioned at the beginning, do check out our SQE FAQs page if you have any questions about the SQE more generally, as we have dozens of questions up there with answers written by BPP's SQE experts, covering a wide range of different topics. As Johnny said, the event isn't over yet. We still have an hour of networking for you to ask any questions you might have to the BPP University Law School team. For the speakers, please hang tight for the time being, and we'll explain how you can get across to the networking once the stream has ended. For those of you in the audience, you'll need to click on the Expo tab on the left-hand side of your page. Once you're in the Expo, click on BPP's banner to enter the booth. We'd recommend sharing your audio and video during the networking so you can ask your questions directly to the speakers. And then once your question has been answered, it'd be helpful if you could come down off the screen just to let other students ask their questions to make sure the event runs as smoothly as possible. As mentioned at the beginning of the session, if you have any questions about the SQE, don't forget to check out our SQE FAQs page. Thank you everyone for attending today's session, and we hope to see you at more of our events very soon.
Fabulous. And just before we leave this page, I do have a link to the slides that I'll just put in the chat now. So if you have to leave straight away, I can give you the link to the slides now for you to take away, which I think some of you will find quite useful. So let me just put that in the chat, which is now there, right at the bottom of the chat. Fabulous. So see you in the networking session in a few moments' time. Thanks a lot.